Okay, and I'll share my screen. There we go. So it's good to see everybody this morning. I tell you, at 9:25, it was just Barbara Fink and me wondering if anybody else was going to come to class. But this is the nature of Zoom. Why do you have to come early? You just have to click on the laptop and that's it. You're in class.
I figured you'd be talking about Israel before.
Uh, you know, I tell you, it's interesting. Was at a social event last night, and that's all people are talking about, and how they're watching TV and listening to podcasts and as social media. It's like I'm not doing that. I've never done that. It's just too overwhelming to do that. It would be nonstop. I limit myself to reading a few things, keeping abreast of the news with Times of Israel, and that's enough for me to know I'm connected and I know what's going on. But it's otherwise it's just too much, just too much. That's why I like to when I send out the emails every couple of days, I try to limit that as well. I don't want to overwhelm people with emails, and I want to focus people's attention to certain things that I think kind of emphasize certain aspects of what's going on in Israel. And there are a couple of things that already I have tabbed to send out either tomorrow or Tuesday, and so hopefully those extra thing, couple of videos, a couple of op-eds that people might not have seen might be helpful too. But it is just anyway. One good distraction is Talmud class, and to help us recognize that life does go on, and we need this boost and this distraction in order to be better focused um, um, for standing in solidarity. So, okay. So thanks, Bess, for that tangent. And all right, the bracha for Torah study, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. All right, I said I pressed record, right? Oh, and it is recording. Okay, so last time we started the Mishnah. Let's just look at the Mishnah quickly before we get into the Gemara. So one may not keep an animal in the inns of Gentiles because they are suspected of bestiality. All right, so we had read the introduction to this chapter before. And so here is just a continuation of the idea of who these non-Jews are that we're living in the midst of. The Torah refers to them as idolaters. In the time of the Mishnah, the non-Jews that Jews were living in the midst of were the Romans, and they were idolaters. In the time of the rabbis of the Talmud, they were still Romans in Israel and Persians in Babylonia. The Persians, it's unclear if they're pagan. I'd have to check. It's possible they were Zoroastrian. And the little bit I know about Zoroastrianism is that there are two gods in Zoroastrianism, the god of good and the god of evil. So is that pagan? It's unclear, but it is clear that there's a transition between what Torah is talking about with idolaters and not allowing idolaters to live in the land of Israel because it's an abomination to the Holy Land. So there's that aspect of Gentile, and then there's the Gentiles that we're living with today who aren't, whatever our opinion of of the world and anti-Semitism today, um, however negative feelings we have towards those who are anti-Semitic, I don't think we can say that they're idolaters. We can say other bad things about them, but we can't say that they're idolaters. So the question then is, what do you how much I think the question this chapter is going to be focusing on is trust. How do we trust the other? Because there's a sense of you can trust fellow Jews, even though fellow Jews could be criminals. Like the Daf Yomi is in Baba Kama now, so dealing with laying out the framework for damages and different categories of damages. Yeah, Jews do make mistakes. Jews do make mistakes intentionally and are criminal, but you can still trust a Jew. Julian, you have to unmute. Just press the space bar. Can you do it? Hold the space bar down and then you'll be unmuted if you can't do the microphone. Huh.
Jonah, meanwhile, can I ask a fast question?
Yes, go
Are
ahead.
we using idolaters and pagans interchangeably?
Yes. In my mind, pagans are idolaters.
We're unmuted.
Yes, I see that, but just a second. So I'm just dealing with Bess, the idolater versus pagan. Um, so witchcraft is paganism, is witchcraft idolatry. So, all right,
Yeah.
that's a, yeah. All right, we're getting into semantics, Bess. So I think non-monotheists is the we is the attitude towards those who are not monotheists. And there's a sense then, again, of trust. Can you trust a monotheist, Christian, Muslim, Jew, versus a non-monotheist? There's something about the nature of religion that makes one trustworthy, or is it the nature of the culture that goes with it too? Julian.
Okay, it's me really.
Yeah, Zella.
And this is a tangent, I apologize, but it sparked something I always think about.
Okay.
If we don't proselytize, we don't try to make other people become Jewish, then why do we care if people are pagans or if they believe in one God, as long as we tolerate other people?
So what the question for this tractate is, how much do we tolerate other people that we're living with? Right.
Mhm.
So it says there are a couple of givens that are not expressly articulated in a tractate. One is that we as Jews, in the time of the rabbis and since, are a minority in the country we live in, except for the state of Israel, so which is unique. So every place else in the world, we are the minority population. So the question is, how do we live as Jews in relationship with the majority population? Do we just isolate ourselves and say that in order for us to ensure our survival, we need to be totally cut off from everybody else and self-sufficient? It works for the ultra-Orthodox in Muncie and Borough Park. Is that a an effective way of living a Jewish life? And since the majority of Jews don't live like in Muncie and Borough Park, then if you're not living there, then you are interacting with non-Jews. And then the question is, How much do you interact? And the interaction could be forced on you in that you have to go to work, and where you work will entail interacting with non-Jews. So that's forced on you. There are voluntary interactions, right? You choose some extracurricular activities that you're participating in, volunteer clubs, the doctor that you go to, therapists that you go to, things like that. Those are voluntary, right? And there are some people who will only go to a Jewish doctor because you think that you can trust a Jewish doctor, or perhaps a Jewish lawyer too. You can trust a Jewish lawyer versus a non-Jewish doctor, a non-Jewish lawyer. So there's the issue of trust there. Um, and then there's also the trust goes hand in hand with the nature of non-Jewish culture, right? So there are elements of Jewish culture that makes us who we are, right? The Torah is the basis of our culture. And to be a compassionate person, a humble person, caring for the well-being of others, that's part and parcel of what it means to be Jewish. Can you say the same thing about non-Jews? Do non-Jews care about the same things we do? So trust goes hand in hand with the nature of the person that you're asked to trust or not. All right, so that's what's at the in the background. One may not keep an animal in the inns of Gentiles because they are suspected of bestiality. So according to the Mishnah, the culture of non-Jews is such that they will engage in bestiality. We know as Jews that that is a law that if you transgress it, first it's considered an abomination, and it's one for which you can be executed for. So our culture says bestiality is bad. The Mishnah says, the non-Jewish culture says bestiality is okay. And therefore, that makes it impossible, or there's a great um, um, there's a great obstacle in the way of being able to interact, because those who travel in the time of the Mishnah travel by means of an animal, and most likely you're not making it to the place where you're going in one day. You're going to have to stop, and you have to find a place to keep your animal. Most likely, that's going to be a non-Jewish inn. So now you're faced with the question, what do you do with your animal? Are you going to sleep with your animal in the stable to ensure that your animal is safe? Or are you going to find a Jewish inn? And there may not be Jewish inns. Do you go out of your way in where you're going to know that you're going to stop at the Jewish inn, as opposed to the more direct way that you're going, right? So in other words, if they had Waze back then, you want to put in Waze, send me on the way where there are Jewish inns, or like you can tell Waze to take me on the highway or not on the highway, or toll road or not toll road. So Jewish inn or not Jewish inn could be the way you can direct yourself if there were such a thing, right? So it's trust, and it's the basic laws that that define who the people are.
Okay.
Okay, so so now this is the background to this, the commentary to this. Since even Gentiles are prohibited from engaging in bestiality, a Jew who places his animal there is guilty of violating the prohibition. You shall not put a stumbling block before the blind. In other words, yeah, they may say bestiality is bad, but it's not as much of of a bad thing as it is within Judaism. In other words, they claim outwardly that they're against it, but we know the non-Jews, they really do engage in it. So it's a matter of not wanting to tempt a non-Jew to do this. And a woman may not seclude herself with Gentiles because they are suspected of engaging in forbidden sexual relations, right? So that's if you're traveling and you're a woman and you're going to a non-Jewish inn, you shouldn't do that because your life, you're not going to be safe as a Jewish woman because also non-Jews are not inhibited. And any person may not seclude himself with Gentiles because they are suspected of bloodshed. And it's not safe for any Jew because your life is at risk, because there's not any little thing can set a non-Jew off, and they'll kill you in a moment without thinking anything of it. Now, we know from Jewish history that these things are facts, right? We know that our ancestors succumbed to situations like this over the centuries. So do those instances, and there are multiple instances that range throughout different cultures, both Muslim and Christian cultures. And it's Catholic versus Protestant, yes, Muslim as well. So it's these things have and Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox Christianity as well. So all strains of non-Jewish religions have participated in these brutal acts against Jews. So because it happened multiple times, is that enough to say that to make a global a universal statement that non-Jews do this? That's a question. That's a question for today. So again,
Larger, please.
yes.
You can
What's-
make the print larger.
Oh, make the print. Yes. There we go. Okay, so again, there was this background that we had read last time. Gentiles are referred to as Goyim in the Mishnah. As stated in the introduction to this chapter, the sages throughout the generations were troubled by this Mishnah and have explained its implications with regard to Gentiles in various ways. One explanation is that of the Meiri, who explains that the sages in the Talmud were referring to pagans whose way of life was completely lacking in ethical or moral constraints and who for many centuries cruelly persecuted and murdered the Jews. The Meiri claims that by his time in the 13th century, all of humanity had adopted the moral and ethical codes of the major monotheistic religions. Therefore, statements like the one in the Mishnah do not apply to contemporary Gentiles. Now, the other thing about this, why the Meiri, and so let me just finish. This explanation repeated throughout his voluminous works was adopted by many later authorities, including several 20th century rabbinic luminaries, among them Rabbi Avraham Yitzchak Kook, Rabbi Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, and Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg. What I was thinking of is that in the Meiri's time, in the Middle Ages, Jewish books were censored. And so the part of ensuring that the books would survive censorship might have been comments like those of the Meiri to say we have to interpret these words. We shouldn't be, and we never do read them literally. We always read them with commentary. So that could be the reason why he's saying this, because certainly in the time of the Meiri, there were anti-Semitic incidents. They were happening all the time. So you could see that perhaps sometimes within Jewish circles, Jews are nodding their head as they're reading this. Yeah, I've heard stories, I've had experience with this very thing. So yes, the Mishnah is speaking truth to power. But publicly, we shouldn't be saying this. So it's fascinating that, in our day and age too, you know, how can we trust the non-Jews that we're living with, right? And it's those rare incidents like I mentioned on Shabbat. What what I mean is the following: that that you just scratch the surface, and anti-Semitism seems to well up. And 400%, the ADL says 400% increase since October 7th, since the Israel-Hamas war began, 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in America. It's rampant now, more than ever, and it creates a feeling of isolation, a feeling that can we trust the people that we live with? When is the other shoe going to fall, etc., etc. So I mentioned on Shabbat that I received a letter from the Reverend Monsignor Charles J. Parry of the St. Patrick Catholic Church, which is on 108 in Olney. And it's just an unsolicited letter. Dear Rabbi Lehman, we are absolutely dumbfounded by the anti-Semitic response of the world at large and of that of our own country regarding the events surrounding Israel and the devastating terror and deadly outbreaks thrust upon her in recent weeks. In the midst of it all, please know that our community at St. Patrick Catholic Church stands with you and with your community. I'm wrong. St. Patrick Catholic Church is on Norbeck Road in Rockville. Okay, I'm assuming I didn't look at the address until now. So this is the church on Norbeck Road in Rockville, not the one in Olney. So I have no relation, had no relation with this church at all. So in the midst of it all, please know that our community at St. Patrick Catholic Church stands with you and with your community. If you ever need us to surround you with our communal presence, we will be there with and for you. You are not alone. Please share our sentiments with your community. Our prayers at Sunday Masses continue for your well-being and safety in a world gone awry. With every grace and blessing, we remain sincerely in our Lord, the Reverend Monsignor Charles J. Parry. So it's a beautiful letter, and goes a long way in saying, yeah, you're not alone. But the exception tragically proves the rule. Okay, so now the Gemara on this. So that's the Mishnah. Don't leave your animals, don't leave your women, don't leave yourselves in non-Jewish inns. With regard to the assumption that Gentiles are suspected of bestiality, the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Baraita, right? Something from the time of the Mishnah that didn't make it into the Mishnah, from this tractate also, chapter 2 of the Tosefta. One may purchase an animal from Gentiles for use as an offering, and there's no concern that it might be unfit due to it being an animal that copulated with a person, or due to its being an animal that was the subject of bestiality, or due to it having been set aside for idol worship, or due to the animal itself having been worshipped. Right? So in other words, the Mishnah assumes that Gentiles are suspected of bestiality. If the Mishnah assumes that, then why are we allowed to buy an animal from a non-Jew? Because you have to assume that that animal had non-Jewish moral things done to it, right? They had Gentiles things done to it, bestiality, being worshipped as an idol, or being set aside for idol worship, or being worshipped as an idol. So then Mishnah says assume the worst about these animals and what the Gentiles are doing with them. Baraita says no need to worry about it, and you can buy such an animal from a non-Jew. So how do we reconcile this seeming contradiction. Either non-Jews engage in bestiality or they don't. The Gemara analyzes this ruling. Granted, there's no concern that the animal was set aside for idolatry or was itself worshipped. The reason is that if it is so that it was set aside, or if it is so that it was worshipped, then the Gentile would not have sold it to the Jew in the first place. Right? So one idea, an animal for sale in the non-Jewish market is an animal that's not being used in that way. That is what you can assume. But with regard to the possibility that it is an animal that copulated with a person or an animal that was the object of bestiality, not sure what the difference is. I thought that's what the definition of bestiality is. Let one raise a concern in line with the ruling of the Mishnah. Right? So the fact that it's for sale means that it's not being worshipped or set aside for worship, but it could still be, you can still think that it had been used for bestiality. So then that's where the contradiction still is in place. So the Gemara explains, Rav Tachlifa says, that Rav Shela bar Avina says, in the name of Rav, a Gentile protects and thereby spares his own animal so that it will not become barren. Since an act of bestiality may cause an animal to become barren, there is no concern that the Gentile engaged in immoral behavior with it. Therefore, one may use an animal purchased from a Gentile as an offering. So, the reason why a Gentile would not engage in bestiality with a Gentile owned animal is that they know that it affects fertility of the animal. Who knows if that's true, but apparently that's the science, the so-called science at the time. Okay, so maybe there's a difference between copulating with an animal and bestiality in terms of the human being, the gender of the human being and the gender of the animal. Maybe there's a difference there. I don't know. Okay, so the Gemara asks, this works out well with regard to female animals, as they can become barren. But with regard to males, what is there to say? Right? So if you're worried about a female animal being fertile, then yeah, Gentiles protect their female animals. But are they as protective of their stud animals? Rav Kahana says Gentiles also refrain from engaging in bestiality with their male livestock, since doing so deteriorates the animal's flesh. That is, it makes them physically weaker. And who knows if that's scientifically correct either. Okay, so Rav Kahana says, Gentiles don't do this with their male or female animals. Rather, the Gemara instead raises a contradiction from that which is taught in a Baraita. One may purchase an animal for use as an offering from their shepherd, that is, a Gentile shepherd. The Gemara explains the apparent contradiction. In light of the ruling of the Mishnah, let us be concerned that perhaps he engaged in bestiality with the animal, as it does not belong to him, and therefore it should be prohibited to purchase an animal from Gentile shepherds. The Gemara answers, their shepherd is fearful of engaging in bestiality with the animals under his care due to the forfeit of his wages that would result if this were discovered. Okay, so the rabbis are trying to prove that Gentiles do not engage in bestiality with their animals, whether they own the animal or whether they are a shepherd to, whether they are a Gentile shepherd for Gentile sheep. Rather, the Gemara instead raises a contradiction from that which is taught in a Baraita. one may not deliver an animal to their shepherd, that is, a Gentile shepherd. The Gemara explains the contradiction. Why may one not do so? Let us say that their shepherd is fearful due to the forfeit of his wages, and accordingly, one should be permitted to give him an animal, right? So what's wrong with delivering, letting a Gentile shepherd watch your sheep? Why is there a law against it when we just said that Gentiles don't do those things with their sheep? The Gemara answers with regard to themselves, that is, other Gentiles, as they are aware of each other's actions, they are fearful that they may be caught, and therefore will not engage in bestiality with an animal belonging to another Gentile. But with regard to ourselves, Jews, as we are not aware of them and their behavior, they are not fearful of us. The Gemara notes that Rabbah said this is in accordance with the adage that people say, just as the stylus etches script upon marble, a sinner knows his fellow sinner. That is, a transgressor is acutely aware of others who act in the same manner, right? So you know your own people, and perhaps we but I'm not sure that this makes total sense. In other words, if the Gemara is saying that Gentiles are careful among themselves, but maybe not, but don't know Jewish ways, or that Jews don't know Gentile ways, we just said that we know Gentile ways and they don't do this. So so it's unclear to me what this adage is trying to teach, and what the kind of conclusion that they're trying to arrive at. But this adage, just as the stylus etches script upon marble, a sinner knows his fellow sinner. Here's the background to it. The stylus is a carving instrument made of hard metal that was frequently used for engraving or embossing script in stone tablets. The use of a chisel was less common, as it was reserved for larger designs in which the rocks were carved into the desired shape. Okay. So let's go on. The Gemara raises a difficulty. If that is so, and the reason one may purchase an animal for use as an offering from a Gentile is that engaging in bestiality has a negative impact on the animal, then let's not purchase male animals from female Gentiles, as we should be concerned that perhaps she engaged in bestiality with it. This would not damage the animal or render it barren, and therefore there is no deterrent that would prevent a Gentile woman from doing so. The Gemara answers, since if she were to engage in bestiality, the animal would follow her around in public. She is afraid of others discovering her behavior. So perhaps engaging in such behavior would cause the animal to want to follow that person around, seeking more of the same, and that would embarrass the person in public, because everybody would know why the animal is following the person around. Okay, fascinating things that we're learning about people and animal behavior. The Gemara further asks, but consider that which Rav Yosef teaches. A widow may not raise a dog due to the suspicion that she may engage in bestiality, and she may not allow a student of Torah to dwell as a lodger in her home. Granted, it makes sense that that is prohibited for her to have a student of Torah lodging in her home, as he is regarded as discreet in her eyes, so she will not be deterred from sitting with him. But with regard to a dog, since it would follow her around after she mates with it, she's afraid to engage in bestiality with it. Therefore, it should be permitted for her to raise a dog. So we're talking about a Jewish widow and a Jewish student. So this is fascinating too, the things that the rabbis are saying that Jewish people should refrain from. So a widow cannot have a Jewish student lodging with her for fear of the temptation that might be involved there. And a widow is not allowed to raise a dog for fear of that temptation as well. So, so there's this note here: a widow may not raise. Jews are generally not suspected of immoral conduct with animals. There may be suspicion concerning a widow who lives alone with a dog. To prevent such rumors from gaining momentum, she's advised against raising a dog in her home.
I have two questions.
Yes, Bess.
What if it were a female dog? And why does it distinguish between raising and keeping? Do you know what I mean? Raising sounds like you're bringing in a dog. Having a dog might imply that the dog was there before the husband died. But what if it's a female dog? Why is that not good?
So that's interesting. So the Aramaic word here for raising is terabe, and I'm not sure what the Hebrew equivalent of that word is. And yes, kalba here, the aleph is like the hey at the beginning of a word, so that is the masculine word. So yeah, it's possible she could raise or own. So I'm not sure if it's raise, if it exclusively means to raise as opposed to have, own, whatever. And perhaps we can read it as only a male dog she's not allowed. So there is, yeah, well, the Rambam says, here's the halacha related to this: a widow may not raise a dog to avoid any suspicion of bestiality. So it's in Rambam, it's in the Shulchan Aruch. And the Shulchan Aruch, and yeah, so it's both Ashkenazi and Sephardi law not to do this. Who would have thought that this is a Jewish thing?
Is that still honored today?
I don't think so. I don't think so it's the fascinating thing is, I don't know why the rabbis, this isn't the only place in the Talmud, I don't know why the rabbis have hold people in such low esteem. In other words, rabbis always think the worst about people as opposed to the best about people. And they want to assure as much as possible that people aren't tempted. So who would have thought that people would be tempted by such a thing? Now, disgusting things are out there in the world, and they're there for the finding on the internet. But before the time of the internet, it was harder to find these things or to engage. You would imagine harder to engage in these things too. But so I don't know in the time of the rabbis how common something like this was. So the fact that it's taught in the Talmud and then reinforced by the Rambam 1,000 years ago and reinforced in the Shulchan Aruch 500 years ago, I mean, it is Jewish law. I don't know if modern, I would assume that there are lots of Jews in the Orthodox world who own pets. Maybe not so much. I don't know. I wonder if you can do research about Orthodox Jews who own a pet versus non-Orthodox Jews who own a pet, because there's some halachic issues with owning a pet, especially when it comes to Passover and how to feed the animal on Passover with kosher or Passover food or not, and things like that. Maybe for some Orthodox Jews, it's just not worth the halachic trouble of owning a pet. But I don't know. That's just anecdotal on my part. I don't know if it's true. So, and having a dog, this isn't a pet. Having a dog on the farm serves a useful purpose. in terms of what you're using the dog to do, to corral the animals, whatever, you know? So it's not like just to have fun, to play with and teach tricks to and things like that. So are people lonely on the farm and desperate on the farm to engage in such behavior with their animals? Obviously, it was done, or else the rabbis wouldn't have talked about it. So it happens to be that Jews engage in this too. So we're getting into the idea of how to maintain your moral reputation. So the next note here. Yes,
My
go ahead,
Jewish,
Bess.
my Jewish learning seems to imply that there are no this is my Jewish learning. Jewish tradition does not expressly prohibit the keeping of dogs as pets, but biblical and rabbinic sources do include numerous references that associate dogs with violence and uncleanliness and frown on the practice of keeping them in one's home. There's nothing to do with, I'm looking quickly, but I don't see
Right.
anything forbidding it.
Right. So again, my Jewish learning is good, but it doesn't include every possible idea. You know, in other words, if I were writing an article for my Jewish learning, it's a general introductory kind of source, and I'm not sure I would have been aware of this source about widows and dogs. So, okay. And the next note, a widow may not raise. Although Jews are generally not suspected of immoral conduct with animals, there may be suspicion concerning a widow who lives alone with a dog. To prevent such rumors from gaining momentum, she's advised against raising a dog in her home. Right, and may not allow a Jewish student as a lodger. This refers to either providing lodging to a student or hosting him for a meal. Right, so a widow cannot be alone with a student who is male. Yeah, so there are some matters of this are still true in the ultra-Orthodox world. If you've watched Stissel, then you know about how young ultra-Orthodox people meet each other. They do it in public, a very public place, to ensure that there's nothing untoward going on.
So they don't ever say anything about a widower and a dog?
Right. So that's interesting. Why wouldn't it be is it okay for a widower to have a dog? Well, certainly a widower is allowed to have a student, so it's one thing to suspect one of immoral sexual behavior, illicit sexual behavior. It's another thing to think that illicit homosexual behavior. So that the rabbis are assuming, we don't do that. We don't have to assume, but it's like bestiality is a level below homosexual behavior. Yes. So it's fascinating stuff here. Yeah. What we have to worry about. And in other words, we're getting to what we're worrying about with Jews when the Mishnah started about what to worry about with Gentiles. So perhaps the editor of the Gemara is saying, hey, the pot shouldn't call the kettle black. Right? So because we worry about this for ourselves. So why is the Mishnah just focusing on worried about them? Okay. So the Gemara answers, since it will also, the dog will also follow her around in a case when she throws it a piece of meat. People will say the fact that it's following her is due to the meat she threw at it, and they will not suspect her of bestiality. Consequently, she will not be deterred from transgressing. So there could be other reasons why a dog could be following this woman around. Maybe it's a stray dog and she fed it. So the dog will naturally come back to her. So there are the reasons why a dog could be following this woman around. Don't assume bestiality. You can assume something better, that she's feeding the animal. The Gemara asks, with regard to female animals with females, what is the reason that we do not permit them to be secluded with each other, right? Which might get to Bess's question. It's one thing for a widow with a male dog. What about the prohibition of a woman with a female dog? Mar Ukva Bar Chama says it's because Gentiles frequent the wives of others, and on occasion, the Gentile does not find her, and he finds the animal and engages in bestiality with it instead. So, Gentiles are lustful and have no inhibitions, and will make use of anything that they come upon. Okay, because Gentiles frequent, it's explained in the Jerusalem Talmud that male animals may not be secluded with men for the same reason as women frequent their friends' husbands, and if the men are not home, they might engage in bestiality with the animals instead. Okay, it's fascinating stuff about what people are assumed to be doing. It's and I'm not so sure that people assume this today, right? I don't think that that this is part of some reasoning that would be halachic reasoning that would happen in modern Orthodox or other traditional circles. So, and if you wish, say instead, even when he finds the wife, the Gentile, he also engages in bestiality with the animal. As the master said, the animal of a Jew is more appealing to Gentiles than their own wives. As Rabbi Yochanan says, at the time when the snake came upon Eve, at the time of the sin of her eating from the tree of knowledge, it infected her with moral contamination, and this contamination lingers in all human beings. I think there's midrash about what Eve and the serpent did, aside from Eve eating the fruit that the serpent suggested, right? So there could have been some stuff going on between the Eve and the snake. I'm trying to be as G-rated as possible with this. But whatever happened there wasn't just the serpent and the fruit and Eve and then handing it on to Adam to eat the fruit. What happened was that a moral contamination happened, that the eyes of Adam and Eve were open to some evil things that they were not even aware of before they ate the fruit. So it is a fascinating origin story of why people are tempted to do or to watch unseemly things, right? Why is it that we have the evil inclination in us? And the answer is, according to the Torah, the story of Adam and Eve and the snake, right? So that the purpose of that story is trying to explain why we have such a hard time to overcome the bad in us. Okay, so to finish this paragraph, the Gemara asks, if that is so, a Jew should also be suspected of engaging in bestiality. The Gemara answers, with regard to the Jewish people who stood at Mount Sinai and received the Torah, their contamination ended, whereas in the case of Gentiles who did not stand at Mount Sinai and receive the Torah, their contamination has not ended. So this is fascinating that Mount Sinai seems to cleanse us of this, what is called in Christianity, the original sin, right? Original sin, or the fall of humanity. So the Garden of Eden story of the snake and Adam and Eve and the fruit is the fall of humanity, the fall of man, and the original sin. So Jews don't see it that way. And certainly Mount Sinai, Moses, the people of Israel receiving the Torah, is the antidote to any kind of thought that we might have been infected with original sin. Now we're not anymore. The Torah has wiped that away. Whereas the Gentiles don't have something like that to wipe that away from them. I think that they would argue that if you're baptized in the name of Jesus, that should wipe it away. But the rabbis are not buying into that. Okay, so interesting stuff here. We're going to stop here for today, and we will have class next week. That's the 19th. But then the following 2 weeks, it's Thanksgiving weekend, and then that following week I'll be away in Rhode Island visiting my kids and my granddaughter. So next week, yes, and then the following 2 weeks, no. Okay, I had sent that out in an email, but I'll remind people again when I send out the recording for today. Have a good rest of the day, everybody, and a good week, and we pray for peace in Israel.
Thank you.